Okay. So we're recording this section. Ideally, if it's microphones off, although I can mute people if their kids are just blethering on a lot. There is a chat button which you're welcome to pop in any thoughts that you've got at any point. This will be recorded and sent out to you, and the PowerPoint and all the resources will be shared with you at the end of the day. Gareth.
Yes, hello everybody. We're following on with the same themes as we've had this morning. So we're going to be celebrating even more. We're going to be looking at the wonderful work of students and all the incredible creativity that's gone on with supporting and helping students over the last couple of months. Of course, we're going to be connecting with one another and sharing great practice again, and looking at some interesting ideas and some exciting ways that we might be able to adopt stuff in the forthcoming term in September. And also we're going to continue to unlock theories and ideas that we hope will be hugely beneficial to you as you start thinking about future
planning. Okay, and our plan for this afternoon, we're going to be wedding crashing with John Keats first. Then we're going to have some work on dual coding and then literacy. We're going to have, this is the scary bit where we're going to go off the PowerPoint and see if we can go live with someone else controlling it to show us how to use forms in Excel brilliantly. We're going to talk about quick wins with SEN students, another teacher showcase like we had 2 this morning. We've got a session on how to make your online lessons as fun as a real and normal lesson. And then we end with the A to Z of teaching and learning. Now you notice there in purple, we've got loads of amazing feedback. We've got comments also from students and parents. We asked students for what they'd appreciated from the teachers, and many of them named teachers as well. And I've forwarded a few of those on to people. The kids were really, particularly in year 9, were really effusive with the praise, such as Maddie, who says this. Have a read. Thanks, Maddie. We're going to start now by thinking what happens when you cross a great 19th century romantic poet with a not great 21st century pop band. I'm going to ask you to go to your emails, please, and can you click video 1? Now, this will last 7 minutes. The video will last 7 minutes. If you have I'll have you muted on here so you can watch it. The first 3.5 minutes are the same as the first 3.5 minutes of Matt's video this morning. So we will come back here at 13:40 when we're done. Enjoy, it's brilliant.
Phil's asked me to do a little summary of my John Keats lesson I've done the poem Lay Me Out, and just some of the things that I've done for them. So I'm just going to run you through some of those now. It's been fantastic for me to join
If anyone's just joined us, we're watching video 1 from the email links. Sorry, I was on mute. I think we'd agree Matt probably deserves a round of applause for his performance there. Well done, Matt. Okay, thanks. So we're going to, here is another piece of student feedback. This is from Juliet in year 10, who has thanked some specific teachers. Mr. Gray will like this if he's here. Have a read, please. we've had loads of messages like that, and we'll try and share them all out with people over the next few weeks if we can. Okay, Alex, you want to talk about dual coding?
Yeah, so we did a little session I did remotely a few weeks ago on dual coding. And if you're in the morning session, this is kind of the direct link afterwards from cognitive load. So dual coding, we did a working group on this and cognitive load, and we delivered a training session on this. So I'm just going to kind of recap the main ideas that might be relevant for planning right now for the end of term and beyond. So for dual coding, it's this idea of bringing together verbal and visual information that makes it better for students to actually comprehend and take in that information. So if we just go to the next slide. So just to recap cognitive load, which I talked about this morning, the main one we're going to be looking at is the extraneous cognitive load. But just to recap the intrinsic, so the intrinsic is all to do with how difficult the task is. So that might be to do with how many elements are associated with it and how it's actually put together. And then the germane cognitive load is to do with students linking it to their long-term memory from their working memory and actually making links between them all. But the one that will help with reducing cognitive overload is the extraneous cognitive load. So if you don't have a balance between these three things, basically the students will potentially give up with the task, they won't be able to complete it, and they won't be able to actually follow the instructions. So one of the things that we can have a massive impact on is the extraneous cognitive load through dual coding, because that is all to do with how information is presented. So it could be to do with worksheets or PowerPoints, and it also helps as well with the way that we give instructions. So if we just move on to the next slide. So if we're just going to click through this quickly, and if it was just talking, you just having your private thoughts, this is from a teacher perspective. And when you speak, it's not necessarily going to be that coherent for the students because you're kind of thinking on your feet. And from their perspective, it might not necessarily make that much sense and they might not be able to follow it. But if you put the talk with the visual, so putting those two things together, so you're directing the conversation, you're presenting this information, it's going to move away from it just being quite transient, that information, quite fleeting, to being much more concrete and something that they can build on. So it's shifting it really from their working memory to their long-term memory, which is ideally what we need to do, because that's going to make it more effective as for the students to actually continue and make progress within their lessons. So when thinking about dual coding, when I've been thinking about it and looking at the cognitive load, I've started to maybe think about not just what I'm going to be sharing with the students, it's going to be more how I'm going to be sharing it. And, you know, we've talked about a little bit in the first session, Demru was talking about how he feels that students become a little bit more independent. Well, maybe using dual coding, we can help them become even more independent when they come back to school by thinking about how we're presenting this information and giving them time to actually consider the work, and not just us speaking on top of them, but giving them good resources that are really clear for them to use. So if we just move forward again, please. So here's just a little infographic about how different ways that we can actually use dual coding. So if we think about the main ones in our lessons are going to be handouts, worksheets, and PowerPoints. And if we combine these visuals with the verbal communication, and that could be information on the slide or what we're saying, if we're putting them together, it should be much more effective. But it's not just putting visual things just for the sake of it, it's what's relevant. And that's the key to all this, is making sure that it's relevant and that it's going to be meaningful for the students. So different ways could be infographics, cartoon strips, diagrams, but where diagrams are integrated together with words, not just diagrams by themselves, or timelines. So we just click forward again. This was feedback that we got from students. If we just go back one, Phil, so it's on the, of what they thought made really good, useful PowerPoints and handouts. And luckily, it matches completely with the dual coding idea. So it's using pictures, keeping it simple and keeping it relevant. So this is, I've got this more in my mind now when I'm designing things, mainly now as handouts as well. You know, how can I make a handout more effective so I'm not having to repeat the instructions over and over again, and making sure that the layout is accessible for all the students. So if we just move forward again, please, Phil. So this is from the dual coding book by Oliver I can't pronounce his last name. Phil, can you pronounce it?
Cavalioli.
That's him. So it's got all these different ways that you can actually apply it to what we use in the classroom. So documents, posters, slides, I mean, PowerPoints are going to be the most obvious things, keeping things really nice and clear and concise, like we showed you in the previous training session, having an aesthetic which is really crisp and not too busy. And something that I'm going to be looking at a little bit more is sketch notes and seeing how we can use them in lessons, which I'll show you in the next couple of slides. So if we move on to the next one. So this is just, I'm just giving you some examples. So instead of just having information here about photosynthesis, it's putting diagrams together with that information. So that diagram summarizes it and the labels are on the diagram. And not all the information has actually been put on the diagram, but that could be something that a student can do. So that's the main framework, and then they can add to it in a lesson with their own annotations. And again, another biology one, and they've just got the labels are directly on the diagram as well. So that's getting rid of this dual visual, it's keeping everything together. But then there's further annotations that you can add for revision or to enhance it a little bit further. And then the next one is a timeline, I think, for history. So another way of displaying it. So it's really good. You can have a framework for the students, or they can make it themselves. And maybe I'm going to start thinking about encouraging students not just to write notes like this, to think about how they're presenting their own notes. But I think I'll have to do some training on this with them in order for them to do that. And then if we just click on. And this is the sketch note. So I'll just let you read this quickly. So sketch note is something I'm going to look into a little bit more. I think I might have more success with some of the girls with the pastel highlighters, if I'm honest. So I'm going to try and use that a little bit more in lessons. Because I think if I took this off, you would probably remember some of the diagrams, you remember the apples, you know, as a quick recall, and trying to get students to think about how are they actually making the notes. I think that's it. Is there any more, Phil?
That.
Oh yeah, that's just an infographic, that's fine.
Okay.
So, and here's a quote from Freya for the next one. So that's all it is on dual coding, and here's a lovely quote from Freya.
Okay, Freya has not used a capital I there, but that's fine. I forgot to say that we've deliberately kept the student comments exactly as they were. It's their comments, so it's their grammar, it's their spelling as well. We haven't done any tidying up of anything. So just theirs. And that leads us on to literacy quite nicely, Gareth.
Perfect. Seamless. Hello, everybody. We've got now a little bit, a few minutes to look at building vocabulary, scanning, and reading aloud. So I'm just going to build on some of the things I discussed this morning. But we're going to start with a quote. It's Friday afternoon. I think, therefore, we should listen to or read a little bit of Immanuel Kant. If Phil, you could take us on to the next slide, please. Just have a moment to read through this lovely sentence. I know. It's not easy, is it? It's understanding this sentence takes a huge amount of time, considerable reliance on schemas, which Alex was talking about this morning, the potential need to develop possibly new schemas, and a wide and detailed knowledge about how language and vocabulary can shift and change and have different nuances and meaning. So it's a very, very challenging piece of text, but it takes us on to the next fact I'd like to discuss at the beginning of this session, which is on the next slide, which is that students, apparently, according to the research, need to understand 95% of words in a text to be able to understand it. Now, I was shocked when I first read that because I thought it would be less than that, and I didn't realise that to really unlock a text, you would have to understand that many words. So without word power, sense is very swiftly lost. Cognitive load is very much overwhelmed, just like Alex was talking about this morning, and then learning shuts down, which is pretty much what happens to me when I read that Immanuel Kant quote. I've read it about 20 times and I still don't really quite understand what he's talking about. Also, what's interesting is that context apparently isn't enough. We often think, well, they'll probably pick it up from the context, and when we kind of do a bit more reading around it, it'll be fine. Apparently, that's not always the case for a lot of students. So vocabulary is absolutely key then. We looked before at reciprocal reading. That's one of the things that we could use to develop vocabulary. Also, I mentioned before that we're talking a little bit today about Alex Quigley's thoughts and David Didow's research as well. If you want to find out more about this, I can recommend this book here, Closing the Reading Gap by Alex Quigley, and Closing the Vocabulary Gap as well. The next idea that I want to talk to that's on the screen, though, comes from David Didow, and he advocates this three-step approach to building vocabulary. And he quotes the work of Isabel Beck, who we've talked about before. James Rivets talked about a lot about her and how she identified these three tiers of vocabulary, where one is very sort of everyday standard vocabulary, number two is slightly more advanced, unusual words maybe, and maybe words, for example, I'm going to use the example of benevolent. That might be an example of tier 2 word, and then tier 3 is this sort of very subject specific, very discipline heavy kind of terminology that we might use in different subjects. So Didow says that what we should do when we introduce a new word to a student, whatever that word might be, it might be subject specific, or it might be one of those tier 2 more challenging words. He says that we should go through this process where we simply offer a tier 1 definition. So if we were talking about the word benevolent, we'd say it's a bit like nice. And then that gives students the way into what that might mean. It's not exactly what nice means, but it's a way in. Then we look at recognition. So can students spell that particular word? And this is the point where he suggests that we might use a little bit of etymology as well. So with the example of benevolent, we might say, oh, well, the beginning of the word, it comes from Latin meaning well. Oh, that reminds us of benefit and beneficence. Oh, that means it's all kind of positive words that begin with that word. And it's a way to help students to really understand how that's working as a piece of language, and again, to be able to embed that in their memory. And finally, he suggests that we ensure that all students pronounce the word, say it out loud, understand how it's pronounced, and also how it can shift with maybe it's moving from a verb to a noun or whatever, and also making sure they can use it in different contexts as well. But if we need to understand 90% of words in a text, how do we then encourage students to scan or skim a text to be able to withdraw important information? We often do this. We often say, oh, just scan this or skim this piece of text here. But actually, these are very, very sophisticated processes, not very, very challenging for all students to be able to do. We might do it naturally, we might be quite used to that, but a lot of students, it's really, really hard. David Didow suggests that we really model this for students to make sure they feel very confident in being able to do that. But he also talks about the difference between two different processes here. If we just go on to the next slide, there's a definition of them on there. Skimming effectively is about reading the text to get a quick overview of what's in there, and scanning is about searching the text for specific information. And that process in itself can be quite sophisticated. So we're going to have a little go now. We're going to have a go of scanning. I'm going to show you an extract of a bit of text. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to scan it. On the next slide, though, we've got some questions to see if you can pick these out from this piece of text without reading the whole thing, just scanning it. And the things I'd like you to find out are these. How many, here we are, how many Irish provinces were there, referred to in the text? When did Henry II persuade Pope Adrian IV to give him authority to conquer Ireland? And finally, what were the names of the 3 towns taken by the English? How many Irish provinces? When did Henry II persuade the Pope? And what were the 3 towns? Okay, the extract's coming up now. The time starts now. Or now. Okay, that's enough time, I think. Let's see how many of those you got. This is quite a challenging task, but did you get them all right? And let's see, the answers you should be looking at were these here. There were 6 Irish provinces. It was 1154 when Henry II persuaded the Pope, and the 3 towns were Wexford, Waterford and Dublin. Now, you may have been able to do that relatively swiftly, you may have found that more challenging, but these are the key things I'd like to take away from this, which are on the next slide. And it's these here. Would students be able to articulate that process themselves? Would they always know how to scan a piece of text and be able to pull out the key bits of information? It links back again to what I was talking about this morning about retrieving information and why we're actually engaging a particular text. The second question is, do students know that information questioning in terms of literacy can often be sequential? This is often the way that it's presented. You will have noticed the first question was in the first line, the second question was in the middle of the text, and the last answer was at the very end. This is often how it's presented to students. It's often how they're expected to negotiate a particular text. Do they know that that's a common process? And finally, what are the specific scanning challenges for your own department. Is it different, do you think, in your department, or is it the same as other departments? And how could you think about incorporating some of that to be able to ensure students feel confident, bearing in mind that 95% level of text vocabulary needed to be able to understand a particular text? Okay, so if we just move on to the last point that I wanted to bring up, which is this: that reading fluency is endemic, and that is basically to say that this is a massive challenging problem across the board, and a huge challenge for a lot of students. But the good news is this: David Didow also tells us that reading aloud is incredibly important to us, and everybody loves being read to. And he says that this increases the ability of students to be able to access texts. And it's certainly something that we've been wanting to try and do more in school recently. Year 9 have done it a lot in tutorials, and a lot of staff have brought it into lessons as well. But there are very many good reasons for why this is massively important to students, which we've got onto the next slide there. And research suggests that students who are read to on a regular basis over the course of their education will be exposed to an estimated 1.4 million more words than those who aren't. And what's interesting about this is it isn't everyday talk that they're experiencing here. This is these rare tier 2 words which really build vocabulary and really underline understanding as well. And it's really important for language development. David Didow also says that narratives are psychologically privileged. He says stories are how we think. And we are hardwired to understand that process of this happens, then therefore that happens, which is a standard narrative technique. And bringing that into the classroom, bringing storytelling into the classroom can have a huge benefit, particularly if you look at number 3 there, when it comes to closing the advantage gap. This can have a huge impact, reading aloud, to make sure that disadvantaged students and students with low reading fluency can access text and access the understanding that's going on in there. And of course, this can be done hand in hand with many of the strategies we've talked about today, particularly with the reciprocal reading, which we're hoping to come back to with you in the autumn term. And so I started this morning with reasons to be concerned. I'm going to end with some reasons to be cheerful. Research suggests, if we go on to the next slide there, research suggests that the vast majority of students in our age group completely understand that reading is a master skill. They know it's important, and they genuinely believe, 78% there, believe that they can improve it if they want to. So it's just a question of us being able to help them as much as we possibly can. Thank you very much. I think it's about time we had another quote from a student. And this one is from Lucy in Year 10.
Thank you, Lucy. Is Ruth here?
I'm hoping Ruth is here because she's helping me running my session. We're doing it together.
Yeah.
Just trying to give Ruth access to control this. Where are you? There you are. Okay, so I'm going to make you host. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Smashing.
It's not allowing me to do it yet.
I'm doing it now. So Ruth's going to take over for a few minutes and talk to us about wins with Forms and Excel.
Lovely, thank you, Phil. It's my job to ad-lib until it appears on your screen, so we'll see how long I'm going to be talking for. So we're going to have a little talk to you about Teams and about Microsoft Forms and some of the links through to Excel. Now, Phil has already produced an excellent video sort of explaining the sort of the basics behind Forms and how to set up a basic form, and I know Duncan's done some work with some of his team videos on this as well. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit more today about how we've fitted this into our assessment sort of structure within maths, and a few of the little sort of cheats and little hacks that we've found that really have made it really beneficial for us. We've used this twice already with Year 9 and 10 and as well with Sixth Form, and we're currently using this as part of our end of sort of term feedback that we're involved in, all of the feedback cycle that we're currently running through across the school. And I think it's a really, really powerful tool, and really produce some really meaningful assessment and feedback within that. We've included parents a lot in this. We've emailed parents that this is how we're going to be doing it, and they've been really supportive on it. And to be honest, I think our handing rate has been absolutely superb as well. We've found that with all the current assessments we've run, we've got around about a 90% handing rate, which is really, really good. And I think that's probably higher than we're getting on a day-to-day lesson basis, which is excellent. It's certainly gone very smoothly. And we've kind of experimented with different sort of styles of going about making these forms and making these assessments. particularly we've broken down into sort of 2 sections that we've used in different year groups for different reasons. We've got our self-marking forms and we've got our teacher-led forms. I'm going to hand over to Ruth, who's going to talk you through some of the subtleties behind all of this.
Yeah, can I just double check that everybody can see the form?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, great. So we've made up our forms of multiple choice and also typed answers with the more problem solving questions. So when we set up these assessments, the key thing to click off is the show results automatically, because it gives us time to kind of review student answers. So when students have then completed the form and you get your responses, so this is just a test one, so it is just with me, Chris and Jill on this one. If you then click open in Excel, you'll get a document that looks like this. Can everybody see the Excel document now? Yes, great. Okay, so it's not really I don't think it is hugely user-friendly, but it does have some really useful tools for being able to assess and review different student answers. So we always put our typed answers towards the end of assessment. We know where we need to look. So on forms, you get to type in different answers that you think, the correct answers that you think students might type. But as you can probably imagine, students do type their answers in various ways and put a number of different spaces between numbers. So that we can make sure that everybody is getting marks that they should, if say on this question here, if you filter out the questions that you know students have got right, I've got full marks on, you can then just see, so imagine there's a lot more student answers here, you can see all of their answers and you can then have a look through and think, right, should they be getting the marks for this? And you can copy and paste their answer if you go back to the form and go down on the questions. Even after they've completed the form, you can then go back to the relevant question and then click in and add an answer. And you can just copy and paste it from the Excel document, which we have learned maybe the second or third time round because we were guessing on the first time round. The other useful thing on using this document is if we go back to the beginning, we've then had all of the points that they've achieved on the assessments next to their name. So those of you that are savvy with Excel, we've then done a VLOOKUP with the names on this document with our data tracking. So we've been able to copy across all of the scores onto our tracking just in one quick, smooth process. And was there anything else? I don't think anything just now. So once we've then reviewed all the student answers, we've then asked staff for each class to then go on to the review answers and search for their student's name in this list. And then you can click on a student, and then we've created a bank of targets focused on these topics. And then staff have just had to copy and paste into this area here for the students. After staff have done that, we can then re-download the Excel document. Unfortunately, it doesn't update automatically, but it then means in the same way where we've this quiz feedback section here, all of the targets that staff have put in, we can then, again, in one process, just copy this across into Rachel Thurlow's target setting document. So it's been a really powerful tool for kind of being able to do all of this very quickly for a whole year group. And then once we've done that, we can then send the scores back to students by clicking post scores. And if you use the original link here, the students will then get their assessment back with it all marked. They know which ones they got right, what they got wrong, and it'll show them their specific target as well. Chris, have I missed anything out there, do you think?
No, all I would say is our summer holiday homework is kind of feeding into this, and so therefore what we've got there is they'll get their form back, they've got their targets at the top, and that'll lead into a next task. And the beauty is that by sending them out that original link, it links them through to their personal attempt at it. So rather than trying to keep track of 32 whatever emails, if you've got that many in your class, you can just send out a single link and it will automatically link with their own attempt.
And the other process that Chris mentioned that we've done this, so with year 12, we did want to do it more of marking question by question rather than it be a self-marking one. So this is a one that we've created centrally, and we've used the, just move this out of the way, the duplicate link to share with our staff so that they then have their own version of this, and then it can send out to each of their classes at the relevant lesson. Then when you go on the review answers, you then get the option to add in feedback to each individual questions, give the number of marks that they deserve on each of these. And with this specific assessment, we did ask students to send us photographs of their working with this as well. I think that's everything, Chris.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is forms is very, very useful. It's you can kind of play around it and do different things. But the most interesting thing that we've found out is by exporting the form out to an Excel, that then gives you a whole extra layer of functionality. Those of you people that have worked with me in the past, they know how much I love an Excel document and how I love play around with these numbers. So you can pull these out and merge it with any other Excel document. So yes, we're able to pull out all of their scores and put it on our own internal tracking documents within Maths. We're able to pull all the targets out and sync that up with Rachel Thurlow's document, so we can bring out the entire year group's worth of targets in that way. And it just allows kind of an awful lot of sort of ease in terms of this process. So in terms of how it's going to affect September, well, we are absolutely looking at ways of trying to run these assessments through forms more and more. It keeps everything in place. I'm not a big fan of having any resources on paper. I like things being digitized, and we're experimenting at the minute about how we can sync this up through Teams, essentially to create sort of a digital mark book. So you've got access to students' marks as well as their individual performance through there. I think it could make things like Parents' Evening incredibly straightforward, where all you need is a device, and then you can just click through and not having to have mounds and mounds of papers, which I'm sure a lot of you are getting frustrated by. Okay, I think that's about us done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ruth, could you make me a host again, please?
How do I do that?
If you go hover over me, there's 3 dots there. And I think one of the options is to assign me as host.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you're probably going to want to think about how you'd be using that next year, because that sounds really time-saving and brilliant. If you're in a subject which relies on more extended written answers, you might want to think about how could you possibly find a happy medium between having things automatically marked and having to read everything yourself. Probably one for department training, I think. Okay, we'll go back again with some feedback from Amelie in year 10. Our students are quite impressive, aren't they? Okay, also impressive have been some of our phenomenal SEN students, and Dave's going to talk about quick wins with SEN students.
Afternoon, everyone. If you were in the session this morning, you would have seen some wonderful feedback about how students have been getting on and some great success stories, but also the second video from this morning's session, if you haven't seen it, shows you 3 individuals and their experience of home learning and varying different levels of engagement. So that's one to just have a look at if you haven't already. What comes next, a lot of it's from the SEND Gateway .org.uk, who've done some research into what lockdown has been like for students and just sharing a few of their ideas. So they suggest a 4-stage support process, which looks at things that I know we're already doing, and certainly we've been supporting students with from the learning support side to complement the outstanding teaching and learning that's still going on remotely. So be specific, stay in touch, be creative, review and recall are their 4-stage support process. If we go into be specific very quickly, Phil. So they're just recommending instructions being as clear as possible, and these things will be, you know, what's ingrained already in all of our teaching. But it's good to just remember to assume nothing. You know, given specific page numbers or links to websites, rather than go and research something, give them a steer. that can be a big boundary when they're just asked to research a certain thing. Generalized instructions, as specific as we can be, so they know a starting point, and then creativity and ideas can follow. And the last bullet point I think is crucial. You might sometimes just end up with the one sentence response, but that's okay. And actually that could be a huge achievement for one of our SEND students. It's then the feedback that scaffolds and increases the content and understanding that can follow. The next one is the stay in touch, and this probably has come more through the key workers and relationships with parents and also students, but it's been fantastic with teaching staff using key workers so effectively to plug gaps and look for areas where there are concerns with individuals. That's then helped us bring some students onto site and give them some really bespoke support following the guidance from social distance standpoint, but reassuring students you're there for them and you're there to support them, which I know has been going on throughout the entire process. Parents are keen to be a supportive pillar in these tough times, and we can reach out to them through our team, or if you want to do that yourself, that's absolutely fine. It is a stressful time for all, and parents sometimes are looking for that person just to be there for them and a voice of normality at school. Homework at the best of times is difficult, and a lot of students we've found have struggled, certainly when we're looking at it from those in relation to an autism point, that are struggling with the thinking behind home is home and school is school, and that has been a big barrier. But again, the work that's been given and staying in touch from staff has been so important, and could be a continued point thinking into the summer break. The third one, this session and this morning's session highlights just how creative we are as a staff, and we know the phenomenal teaching and learning that goes on within the classroom and how that's transferred into remote learning. But I think the big one is the interactive resources and pointing students to that opportunity. But also the third one's quite interesting, giving students the opportunity to present the work in their own way. They might struggle to write a paragraph, but actually might be really comfortable presenting that to you in image form or through speech. Some students will speak their exams. They will not write their exams because of their access arrangements, and that's something that they feel comfortable with. So, sometimes they might want to present that in the other way and make that opportunity appealing towards them if needs be. And the last one is something that people might be coming up to in the last 2 weeks or into the summer task around review and recall. And we've just had, Chris and Ruth talking about the quizzes through the use of forms and how they can support students with recalling of learning. There's lots of free apps that are available, but the big one is students do love a Kahoot. We know that, and students that have been setting them, we know our students have been engaging with those successfully. And just to finish off, this is student voice, which we've captured through key workers, but also individual students, where they've shared what they've enjoyed and what they have been able to engage with well through this period. The top one has been really popular, where students have engaged well with personal videos from teaching staff, where they've actually seen your face and have been able to interact through the video, but still see the teacher and have the teacher language, which they've found easier than the written instructions. The option to print things off has been really helpful, and we've obviously been delivering printed off resources to some students as well. Video clips links quite nicely to what Alex has talked about in relation to dual coding and students being able to process things. Again, different ways of presenting work, communication, Kahoot we've already mentioned, and just creativity and choice. Students will complete work, and we know confidence is a big thing, and that all fits into them moving forward. And just to finish with a quote, this time from a parent, Minnie in year 10, Minnie Stillgrove. You may never have taught her, but you may probably have heard her name. This came from her mum.
Oh.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Dave. We have a bit of feedback here from Millie. Have a read of that. So this is one of about 60 or 70 bits of student feedback that we got, and lots of them named individual teachers. And if you're here this morning, you'll have seen that we had Adam Rule and Lois Thompson presenting, because they were named an awful lot of times. The other teacher who was mentioned an awful lot of times, but those three people got the most mentions, most thanks, is Louise Gibson. So I've asked Lou to do a presentation of what she's been sharing with kids that they found so inspirational. Are you there, Louise?
I think I am now.
Oh, phew.
Is that right?
Yeah. Off you go.
Yeah, so I'm up as Panda because I'm on my daughter's laptop, but that is actually me. I'm just going to show you what the art department has done over lockdown. One of the biggest obstacles, I'm sure you'll all agree, is trying to keep students enthused and motivated. So this grid here is what we came up with. The kids seem to like this. Got to find ways of keeping them hooked with lots of variety of challenges. So this is year 9, obviously. There's 8 challenges over a half term, which meant that students could choose from a variety of different tasks. And on there you can see things that they can easily access at home, like portraits or food, but they all seem to want to draw the dead insect task. I don't know why. And animation, so like a really good variety, but also it's differentiated, so you can see from the left to the right, it steps up in challenge, so they could choose what they wanted to do there. Now if you just move on a bit, Phil, can you move to the next slide, Phil? Yeah. Ideally we've asked them to upload the work on a digital art folder, so that means they had a little bit more ownership over it, and that live document was easier for us to track as well. And then also you could put a little bit of analysis on it, so you could see that they understood why and how they were actually doing things. So just move on, Phil. Move on to the next. Yeah, things like this. That's it. And the next one, because they're just examples from the same girl, Scarlett Davey. But if they didn't have access to that PowerPoint, because some of them couldn't download that for some reason, and they could just upload the photographs. And so what I really liked about the work that the kids sent in was I found that some kids really shone in lockdown more so than they did in the classroom environment. And here's 2 really good examples. I mean, Beth's always good at art, but the things that she's been sending me are absolutely amazing. And then also being resourceful with the materials that you've got in your house. So like Matthew's made a Hokusai wave just with things in his bedroom. I love that. I think that's great. Next slide. I just wanted to show what we've been doing with year 10. So in class, they actually got the first 2 artists done, but over lockdown, they've nearly completed a GCSE project. Now that has been no mean feat. It's been really tricky to do because every student has a different project. And so the feedback has had to be bespoke for every student. And that's required an ongoing dialogue. So I have constantly been on my phone. If it wasn't for dictaphone, I think my fingers would have dropped off. But I've just had that with me out and about every day, just talking into it. So it's enabled me to get quite a lot of information sent to students quite quickly. Through all year groups, I've been doing that. And the other thing I've done a lot of is praise. I've praised a lot more than I would in class, just to keep them motivated. And I think that their positive mindset, it's been important to keep them really positive so that they've carried on with it. And I think that's it. We've hooked them in. The majority of them have kept on going. And so that's just what the art department's done for motivating and enthused students. And I've just really loved the amazing variety of work we've got back from our students. That's it, Phil.
Thanks very much, Louise. Okay, Ankita's been part of a team who've been really trying to work on Teams and get this going as much as many live lessons as possible with sixth form in an experimental forum, and she's trying to make the lessons as much like a normal lesson as possible. How have you done that, Ankita?
Hi everyone, hope you're well. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, fab, brilliant. I've been doing a lot of live lessons on Teams, and what I found was originally when I was doing them, they were a bit dry. I felt like it was just me talking for half an hour and kids just nodding along and not really getting much from it. And thanks to Duncan for his patience with that, because if you've ever worked with me, I'm definitely not the most IT competent person you've ever met. But one thing that I did start doing was sort of building in a lot of interactive activities to try and pretend that I was in the classroom essentially. So what I'm going to share with you today is just a few really key simple ideas that you'll probably have done in your classroom hundreds of times, but I found worked really well. And as you can see from these pictures here, the students and Mr. Short, surprisingly as well, enjoyed them very much. So if we move on to the first one, really simple concept. On these screenshots, there's only 4 images, but actually on my screen, there was 9 at the time. So it worked really well. So when you can do live lessons, there are 9 people on at the same time. Really simple, had 10 key statements. They had to tell me whether they were correct or not correct. If they were correct, I held up a yes. If they were incorrect, I held up a no. It was great for me from a feedback perspective because I could see immediately who understood and who didn't. I could get certain students to comment and say, well, why have you put that? What justify your answer to me? I could get them in teams from time to time. So I've got 18 in my class, so I had 9 on at a certain time, trying to build as many points for their team as possible. And it's just something really simple that just, I felt like I was in a classroom, and the kids enjoyed it. You can see them cowering behind their yes and no signs so that nobody can see their faces. But just something really simple. It kind of broke up the lessons that I did. Next slide, please, Phil. This one here is something that we do quite often in the classroom, and it worked really nicely on Teams, just words into pictures. I got them all to get the videos on, get a blank sheet of paper, and then I just started through process. So I was like, draw me a lake, show me your lake, right, draw some fertilizers going into it, etc. And I built up, it was quite a complex process, and I built it up stage by stage until they got the final result. And I thought that worked really well, rather than sending them sort of slides full of information, to actually get them to build them up. And then as a follow-up task, what I got them to do was actually send me a descriptive paragraph of what they had drawn. So that was quite nice because they could look at each other's diagrams. As you can see, all 3 of those diagrams are really very different, but it's what made sense to them in their head. And I think that worked really nicely in Teams, and again, broke up that lesson. And then the final slide, please, Phil. The final thing that I've been doing quite a lot, which has worked quite nicely, is if you open up your meeting notes tab in Teams, and what I did there, as you can see in the top left, is I just put essay topic, farming and fertilizers, which is what we'd done the lesson on. And it was quite a boring lesson. I think Alan Keegan's on here, he'd probably agree with me. It's not the most interesting of all the topics that we do. But what I did was at the end of the lesson, I said, okay, right, let's play a game. Here's the topic. I want you to, within a minute, write down as many keywords as you can in the meeting notes, and we'll build up a little keyword summary. I had a 60-second timer on. These are the keywords that they came up with, and these are things that they learned from the lesson. And again, you could see them sort of viciously typing into their keyboards, trying to get as many keywords as possible. And then after that, I set them a task, which is, okay, now you've got to send me an email summary of this lesson, including all of those keywords and why they're relevant. So that was really good because I got a little summary of how they interpreted it. And also these meeting notes save as well. So for future lessons, it's kind of like a glossary that they've built themselves during lockdown of what they thought was important. Yep, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ankita. We're going to, one of the final things we're going to get today is going to be the A to Z of ideas, the A to Z of teaching and learning. Now, this is James Rivet has made this in the last few weeks. And it's fairly self-explanatory. It's an A to Z of teaching and learning strategies. But each letter he has got a fantastic teaching and learning strategy for that you can adapt and adopt into your classroom. I'm going to share that with everyone at the end of today. And when we've finished these sessions, I think it's one of the best teaching and learning resources that we've either got or been made for us in quite some years. It's fabulous. James, after that big build-up, though, do you want to just tell us about a letter?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about Q because obviously I don't have time to talk about everything right now. And if you just move on, Phil, for me, please. Yeah, it's for quilts, and that was shared a while ago via training, but I wanted to have a spotlight on that now because I think it's a really useful task, and thinking very carefully now about task design and the utility of a task and how much you can get out of it and how much it links to prior learning and retrieval. I think this is one of the most important and easily adaptable ones that there are. So we just move on again, please. So basically, students will have a grid. If you click, that's obviously step one. They have a grid, so I just put some Spanish things in there. So if you have a grid, you can have anything in there. You might want to start thinking and reflecting now. If you had a grid of topics you've taught recently, what things would you put in there? How many categories could you have? If we just move on again, please, Phil. Thank you. And again, you obviously make a key to go with that grid. It's very, very simple. Move on again, sorry. And therefore, they then color in either on Word, or if they're really, I don't know, a dinosaur, they can do it on paper, the grid to match the key, and they have the different categories. So as we said when it was first shared, it's sort of an extension of Connect from Magenta. It's a different way of doing it. It's very creative. And I'd like to share with you as well, if we just move forward again. Justine sent this example in from food, and that's really great that she's gone away and done that and acted on that. And it's, again, celebrating some of the great work that's been going on during this time. And how easy it is to do. I think the best thing about it is how adaptable it is. But one thing I wanted to say is that after that as well, you can think about how you'd extend the activity. I think the important thing is to have a sequential task which clearly and explicitly builds on the thinking quilt to expand and develop it further, to avoid a task in isolation, trying to avoid any sort of things which lack direction or lack clear purpose, and the aim being to strengthen connections, deepen learning, building on Magenta, and connecting ideas. And that's one quick thing you can do. It's very easy. I've tried it myself. And if you don't like it, there are 25 other ideas in the PowerPoint, which is shared later. So that's me.
Thanks, James. It's class. Okay, I'm going to ask you now to mute yourselves and then click the second link, and it's only 40 seconds long. The video that I'm going to watch, made by Joe Nugent, which is just an example of how utterly magnificent our students are. So go to your emails, please, and it's video 2. Okay, thank you. So a final thing for today. I'm going to send out a link to a Microsoft Forms that I would quite like people to just take a minute or two to fill in. If you could just say 2 things that you found interesting from today's training that you might want to take into your practice, either on a teaching and learning level or any form of pastoral support for students in any way, whether it's on a year group level, tutor group level, even supporting SEN students in their learning in general, or anything departmental you want to take from this. And if it's a teaching and learning one, if you just put TL next to it, if it's a pastoral 1P and departmental D, that's all explained for you in the form. It's one box to fill in. If you just give 2 things that you think, I really want to know more about that, I found that useful. Then the last one is, do you have any suggestions for training for next year? It could be something that you've read about, I've been really interested in, that we haven't covered much, or something you'd like to cover, us to cover more. Or if you want, it could be some logistical ideas. Now, we know that training is going to be different for us next year. It's not going to be 120 people in the hall. It's not going to be possible to do that. We have plenty of ideas for this as well, but I'm sure that you will have some too. So be really interested in any either topics you want us to cover or any logistical ideas for how you could help us organise training for next year. Okay, and that's everything for today. Thank you so much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it and taken something from that. I'll get the recording out to you today, as well as all of the resources that we've promised to. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Thanks very much for coming.